Yeah, I was living in the UK. I was in the British police force, a detective, and I also organised a small charity which took terminally ill children away for a holiday. It was in early August. The media pictures were beginning to come out of Romania about the children in these institutions, so-called orphanages. And the pictures were somewhat horrific, and my wife actually said to me, why don't you go over to Romania and see if there's something that you can do over there. So I did. I went with the head nurse of the charity I was working with, and we drove to Romania in a borrowed van, and we collected a lot of medical equipment, baby food, what we thought would be useful, and just drove across the whole of Europe.
And what did you find when you got there? What were the conditions these children were kept in?
Well, the institution cared for several hundred children between the ages of 3 and late teens, I guess, maybe 20s. With profound disabilities.
But these disabilities, they weren't born with them?
No. I later found out that the system back in those days was that a child, and there were many of them, were abandoned by mums and never actually left the hospital. So they were cared for in their first 3 years in large rooms in hospitals, where obviously the staff was not adequately trained to look after infants. So in many respects, and staff shortages meant that the children were not getting as much attention as they deserved, so they weren't being stimulated. So when they took this test at 3 years of age, many were found to be what they called irrecuperables. And I worked in a room with 20 children, 10 cots on either side of the room. It was quite dull. It was very damp, despite it being, the summer.
It was like a prison.
Yes, the cells all had, the cells, I call them cells because in my mind that's how I saw them, little prison cells, side by side with these white vertical bars, all rusty. Children who'd never left their cots, effectively, and these were 8 and 9-year-olds, the same age as my daughter at that time, and half her size. They all suffered with malnutrition, they all had pot bellies. I remember also lots of flies that used to congregate around their eyes and their lips, and the children were just so lethargic they didn't even brush them away, they just laid there with these flies on them. It wasn't only the sights, it was the sounds as well. Insane mutterings of children talking to people who didn't exist, just rocking backwards and forwards. So there was always this creaking noise of cots being rocked by the inhabitants, and the smells. I mean, the children all suffered with diarrhea. There was vomiting as well, and my task was simply to keep them clean, which was an impossible task really, because all they had was strips of thin cotton which they used as nappies, which were completely inadequate. So yeah, I mean, the first few days was total shock and numbness really. We started this regime of weaning these children, and it was hugely successful. I mean, within a few days, their attitudes had changed, the diarrhea had stopped, the vomiting had stopped. We then got them out of their cots for the very first time, and that was extraordinary because they screamed and they hollered because we were taking them out of their security. I mean, we were taking them into a place which was unknown to them, which was only on the floor beside their cots. But after time, they started slowly interacting with each other properly. we came with a load of toys as well, and I was giving the toys to the children, expecting them to play with them, and absolutely nothing at all. And then it dawned on me, and I realised that they didn't know how to play with toys. And as a parent myself, of course, we play with toys in front of our children, and they mimic us, and they learn how to interact with these teddy bears and various other things. So we had that learning curve as well, is trying to teach the children how to learn to play. But one of the most satisfying things was getting the children to actually get up and walk, and teaching them to walk. Units was the first, and once he found his legs, that was it. The world was his oyster. All he wanted to do is explore the environment around him. So he was always off walking up and down, trying to find doors to get out of and explore the world. We took them outside in the sunshine, we suspect probably for the very first time. Florentina was a little Roma child with gorgeous black curly locks and big, enormous eyes. And I remember taking her out in my arms, and we came across a tree, and she was partially blind. She had very little sight, but she took a leaf and just rubbed it on her lips,